So for those of you who might not yet be familiar with it, the eSkootr Championship involves 30 riders from 10 teams racing specially designed electric scooters that can reach speeds of over 60 miles an hour. And that's all around inner city circuits. It's a 6-stage competition with races in London and Switzerland having already taken place, and in Italy next month, followed by France, Spain, and the US. We've now got a short video which will show, much better than I can explain, what it's all about.
Which one is going to be the one that wins the very first race?
But London was a blast, the first ever ESC event, and the first time we saw the S1S in action.
Oh, look at Lara coming up the inside.
Yo, when I'm in the race, there's no place I'd rather be. I just need to go.
But now we're going to see
no
the
matter
pass.
where it leads. I'm in control, destination guaranteed. They tell me take it slow, but this is the ESC.
Oh, there we go. Look at the pass up the inside from Wolfen.
From start to finish, super intense.
Can he keep it here?
This is the ESC.
Great, I even saw you popping a wheelie over the finish line. It's like you were really starting to put on a show.
They're on the last lap. It's now or never for these riders.
Yo, when I'm in the race, there's no place I'd rather be.
Oh, big
just need to
slide,
go.
it's Skinner.
No matter where it leads, I'm in control, destination guaranteed.
The champion
They tell me
here
take
is
it
Sion
slow, but this is the
Saragabrini.
ESC.
Great stuff. So Sharon, you've had the not inconsiderable challenge of launching an entirely new sport, a new series. So how have you gone about creating that audience and that viewership?
So this is one of those challenges that you get once in your lifetime where someone comes to you and says, hey, we're going to invent a new sport. What do you want to do with it? And you have to turn that into a strategy. You have to think about all of the key target markets that you're going for, and you have to think about how you're going to create that intersection between a touch point with something that people already know and something completely new. So obviously the first thing that we did was market scope and segmentation, and then within that we really looked at what we wanted to be in terms of a vision. Imagine you have the chance to invent a sport now with everything that you know about the world, and you don't have to inherit any governing body from previous, and you don't have to inherit any ways of doing anything. And so we wanted to create something which was a useful sport that is forward-thinking, that is gender-neutral, that is sustainable, and is accessible to people in a very simple racing format that people will understand. But then also we had to come out and make a big statement about being different, because obviously there are a lot of new sports being launched at the moment, and so we really had to think about visually appealing, what we were going to do from a kind of content perspective to make sure that we really stand out, but also that what we're doing made sense for the future.
And you've spoken about having that unique opportunity of being involved from the start, having that kind of blank canvas, if you like. What's that allowed you to do, would you say, that other sports maybe aren't able to do?
Well, I mean, you can... Everything from the design of the scooter, the content team was involved in. So it meant that really from day one of the very first things I did was build in onboard cameras into the scooter before they were finishing being designed. So before we'd done any collective testing on track, we already had looked at all of the power looms for all of the cables for the cameras and how the RF units were going to work and how we were going to swap them in between the scooters, and we designed it into the racing scooter before we'd even ever had a race. So those types of things where you have a chance to do that and you have a chance to even contractually put in different rights for data and different commercial rights into agreements, because you don't have to inherit any historical IP agreements from any other sport, that you have the chance to build in that kind of ownership that you just wouldn't otherwise have. So we have a real broad reach of rights assets available to us, from heart rate data all the way through to individual data.
And just thinking specifically about distribution as well, what have you been able to do that might be different compared to other sports on that side of things?
I mean, as a new sport, when it comes to distribution, obviously you're primarily trying to build a fan base and build an audience and build awareness, but you also have to think about what you're going to do with your own channels and what you're going to do to build that in the long term. So on the one hand, you have to build something which is going to be broadly appealing to as many people as possible on different channels and really tailor what you're doing in different markets. So, for example, we produced in Spanish from day one, so because we knew that was a key market for us. So our world feed is in English and Spanish, for example, because we knew that that would get us better distribution. But then on the other hand, it meant that we could ask the broadcasters, what day would you like us to race on so it fits better in your schedules? And they said Saturday, so we can play it out on a Sunday. We went, okay then. So that's a super, super unique thing. But when we're looking at our own channels, obviously we could have put everything live on YouTube. Like, actually, if you want to build audience, stick everything on YouTube. And we chose not to do that because we have learned from others that once you put something on YouTube, it's very hard to bring that audience back. And so if we want to...
It just remains...
It remains with YouTube, and then people are upset that it's not on YouTube anymore. And so the reason why we built our own OTT platform in the first place was so that we can own that audience in the long term. That said, we have had to carve out own channel clause in all of our distribution agreements to do that, and we've been lucky enough with the negotiations that we've done that we have global rights, so we don't have to carve out any markets for our own OTT.
So can you tell us a bit more about the ESC Fan Hub? Just to describe for anyone who might not have seen, experienced it or seen it, what it is and why it's so important to you as well.
So the Fan Hub is part of a long-term strategy for us, which is about watching, attending, and eventually riding electric scooters. So obviously, primarily now we're 2 races in, we're really talking about the watching phase. And that is because this is where we're building audience, but it's also how we're going to create a relationship with our audience. We're working with Edgecast on the platform itself, and we've been pioneering 916 live streaming, which we've been doing together with NEP, which we've been doing since day one. We've been doing quizzes and interactive polls with our friends at LiveLike, and actually we've even been able to integrate that into our big screen experience at the event. So actually there's a live chat that works across both experiences, for example. So we're actually getting that broader set of data by using it in that way. But the intention for that platform in the long term is that it is the home of where you might go and race an electric scooter in your local franchise. So in 2 years' time, when we have local racing franchises where we convert karting centres into electric scooter racing centres, we have all of that data, and you can organise to go race an electric scooter racing centre through our platform. So it starts off as content, but it will become a whole community where people are in the future racing electric scooters, organising competitions, and eventually qualifying for the World Championship.
So it's not just about creating the audience in terms of viewers, but creating potentially participants for the
participants our entire marketplace, and it starts with content. And
I know we've spoken about the sustainability aspect of it, and you mentioned that there's been quite a few sports that have launched recently, and sustainability in terms of impacts on the environment is something which seems to be kind of baked into a lot of those sports because they're, as you mentioned, starting from scratch, and they're able to do that. But I suppose sustainability has a broader definition for you guys, doesn't it? And it includes that kind of pipeline.
Yeah, so sustainability for us is about the sustainable long-term future of the sport, but it's also about we're much more pragmatic about it, I think, than other sports, in that we operate in city centres, so therefore our footprint is in a city centre, and the impact that we have is something that people can relate to. We're not going to go on a boat in the middle of the sea and talk about icebergs, because that's just so far away from most people's real lives that doesn't make sense for us, because we are really hyper-local in terms of that community. But sustainability of the sport in the long term is really actually driven through our OTT strategy, because it will be the place where you manage your franchise and where you can sign up to race.
And you mentioned about the rights side of things and owning your own channel effectively. Traditional broadcasters are obviously going to be very, very important in terms of broadening your reach and getting that content out to as many people as possible. You've got a range of broadcasters who have taken some quite different packages from you, haven't you? Can you explain how they vary and how you go about creating that content?
So from the start, we designed the content packages so that they would fit for different types of broadcasters and different types of broadcast slots. And I'm lucky enough to have had in my experience working in the BBC in the rights team, as well as also having been in a brand and obviously distributing content. So if you listen to the broadcasters, they will tell you what they want. And so we produce a long-form live stream that happens on a Saturday afternoon, which is interactive and tends to be on OTT platforms, and gives a long time to build up, where we give it lots of social media media support. And then we have a 90-minute short turnaround version which goes out the following day, which is designed to be scheduled alongside other related sports. So we were having feedback from partners that they wanted to schedule us alongside, say, football or motorsport to extend the longer audience, the younger audience that they have for longer in those slots. So that show is specifically designed to do that. And then we have a 52-minute show which comes out a week later but gives much more behind-the-scenes insight into the series and actually follows a rider during their race weekend as well as having race highlights. And that tends to be fitting into more kind of entertainment and evening-type slots on different broadcasters. So it's specifically designed with that kind of feedback in mind, which I'm not sure that lots of other people are doing with their world feed.
And you mentioned about the, I guess, the sort of youth skewing participants, viewers as well. What impact does that have on the kind of style of production, the type of content that you create as well?
So hopefully when you saw this, you saw that we've taken quite a lot of cues from the world of gaming. And that's partly because we see ourselves in that space where we will be a community in the long term that exists beyond our broadcast. So the Electric City, which is our virtual studio, which you saw here, which is built in Unreal Engine, it is designed so that in the future you will be able to go and watch the races within the Electric City. So the future of that is that it exists beyond the broadcast. At the moment it's a studio, but the intention is that this is a vision of the future of the world that we would like to see with all of our partners. And obviously one of our missions is about improving the situation for micromobility in the world. And this is a place where we can show people what an achievable vision of the near future could be if electric transport and if micromobility is taken up in a more sustainable way.
So a kind of virtual studio plus vision of an ideal way of structuring a city.
It will be a metaverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you give us an idea of who you're working with to create some of that content as well?
There are a lot of partners involved with us. So we ran a tender process and we appointed Boombox as our main production partner. And they're probably not someone who's massively familiar to this room, but they're a Canadian-based production partner that has worked a lot in action sports and gaming, and we deliberately didn't want to look like other motorsports. So obviously we take cues from that, but we really wanted to do something different and creative. And the joy of working with them is most of the time I have to rein them in rather than push them the other way. And you can see that the integrated AR from the Electric City is also integrated into the actual real environment. So it's a mixed reality environment, but in a way that makes sense for the narrative. NEP have been absolutely brilliant in helping provide all of the technical back end of making that happen. Pop-Up is the partner that works with us with the Unreal Engine designer. And Little Dot, and Laura was here obviously earlier on, Little Dot are a really excellent partner for us on building our social channels, and they launched our TikTok account for us maybe 2 months ago, and we already have 3 videos over 2 million views.
Can you tell us what those videos are? Because I mean, we heard earlier that the kinds of content that seems to sort of resonate with audiences. Is it what you would expect it to be, or?
So on TikTok, we work quite a lot with trends because you will have heard our signature track on the video there, but we work quite a lot with the music trends, and we create mostly it's action content that really fits with those music trends, and we're very lucky that there's a music producer called Scooter Gang who is on TikTok, which is a coincidence but a very happy one for us, who promotes everything that we do without us even knowing about it. But for Instagram, it's really much more about getting to know the riders for us. And one of the things that we do is we work with Greenfly to make sure that all of our riders and teams have access to as much imagery and footage as possible. So we're sharing it really, really broadly. And we're maybe not as restrictive on rights as other people might be because we don't need to be. So actually we're really actively providing content to our athletes, of which there are 30, plus also then the 10 teams. And they're then sharing it with their network. And that's a big part of how we're building our fan base.
And when you, because the riders all come from different backgrounds, don't they, from different sort of sports and disciplines. When you were pulling them together, did you have in mind their sort of social presence or their, I don't know, sort of ability to kind of tell that story on your behalf?
It's a balance. I think the way that we're doing communication around sustainability, for example, is actually it's authentic, it's in the voice of the riders, it's in how they understand it. We're not providing them with a script or anything, because then it's just not authentic, and that authenticity is really important to us. So it was a factor, but it wasn't the most important factor. So when we did the rider pool, I think we had 250 different riders actually test the scooter with us. There was quite a rigorous testing process. And obviously they had to be available as well, which is obviously a key factor. And we're unique in the fact that we have a minimum salary for all of our riders. So we're conscious that when they're coming from another sport, they don't necessarily have that financial backing. So we've done this to make sure that they aren't so reliant on trying to find sponsors, and that they can talk in their own authentic voice from the start of the championship.
So you're 2 stages in
Yes.
so far, and so Italy next is at the end of the month, is that right?
It's the 15th and 16th of July.
Right. So what would you say you've learned so far? And have you changed anything? Are you adjusting anything for Italy, for example?
I think we tried to do too much right from the start.
Right.
One of the amazing things about having a blank sheet of paper and being creative is that you can have lots of ideas. And it's exactly the bad thing as well. So obviously we have a big vision, and we know what we want to do with our platform, especially in the future. But you know, we also have a second screen app which we haven't launched yet, which is going to launch in Italy. We could have done it at the start of the season, but we had launched everything all at once. So you know, you need to do things step by step. But having a vision is great, but being able to rein it in and go, what's the single most important thing we need to do at this moment was the biggest lesson I think that we learned.
Yeah, so really kind of honing in on the priorities.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. Does anybody have any questions that they might like to ask Sharon?
Or grab me after if you're embarrassed.
Yeah, back at the front.
It was, because obviously it's so new, how did you pick the people, like in terms of how did you get the riders? Was there just a call out to anyone who rides a scooter?
So we had an open process. We have several Olympic athletes, for example, who were either coming towards the end of their career and wanted to try something different. So we have a range of people from two-wheel motorsport, from electric scooters, because it is actually a sport in its own right on racetracks, from freestyle scooter, BMX. We have Elise Christie, obviously, she's an Olympic short track speed skater. Billy Morgan, he's a snowboarder. So a lot of people actually approached us and we did the open call. There was a few people where we reached out, and that's partly because we wanted more female athletes, because we're a gender neutral sport and guys and girls compete on a level playing field. So we wanted to encourage more female riders to come forward. And we are almost 50-50 gender split, but we did it entirely based on talent rather than on having a quota. So it was a strenuous process, and there's lots of people who were very disappointed that they didn't get in, actually. And then we get approached every single day by hundreds more now, now that we're real.
Okay. Any more questions?
Where can I buy one?
It's like,
we'll buy
it's
one.
like asking me where you can buy an F1 car.
Maybe you have to try it in the metaverse, perhaps, at some point. Might be best. Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, we're pretty much out of time. So, Sharon, thank you very much. Really appreciate you making the time. It's
Thank you.
fascinating. Thank you.